Hi, everyone. My name is Reed. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Stitch, and I'm excited to be kickstarting the Agent Ready video series with all of you today. We've got a very special guest. We've got Carter Rabasa, who leads developer relations at Langflow. And I'll let you do a quick introduction of yourself, Carter, in a moment. But one of the things I'm really excited about is coming from your experience where you've dug really deep into what are the developer pain points and learnings and things that folks should keep in mind as they're starting to kind of expose themselves to agents for the first time, think about building agentic flows. And so this is a great kind of introductory element of our overall video series, as I think we'll touch on a lot of things, maybe lightly, that will then become larger deep dives throughout. So welcome again, Carter. We're excited to have you.
Yeah, no, Reed, stoked to be here. So I guess as quick introduction to me, my name's Carter. I live up here in Seattle, Washington, and I've been a programmer the better part of my life. I started programming when I was maybe a sophomore in high school, good old Turbo Pascal back in the day. So I've just been programming for a very long time. I lead developer relations here on the Langflow team, and I've been in developer relations for over a decade now. And a really important part of developer relations to me is just sort of making programming more accessible to more people. It's part of what we do. Like, we're educators. We educate people on how to use our tools, but the education often exceeds those narrow boundaries. So it's a part of my job that I love. And it's AI has obviously like completely changed what it even means to be a programmer. And it's drastically expanded the scope of people who can build software. So it's never been a more exciting time to be in this industry. Things are changing super fast. If I'm being super honest, I got to AI late. I was a normal full stack web developer, working at a series of API companies. I got my start in DevRel at Twilio, which I'm sure a bunch of folks are familiar with. When I joined, they were a very anonymous company, and I kind of took a chance. But now they're very well known. And I really didn't get into AI until about a year and a half ago. So this is well past ChatGPT. And I joined DataStax, which was a company that was getting into the AI space, shipping vector databases, and eventually acquiring Langflow, which is the product I work on right now. And DataStax was actually just acquired by IBM. So technically, I guess I'm an IBM employee. But I just say this to say that I'm new to AI. I have not been in machine learning or AI for the past 3, 4, 5 years. And I can really empathize with people that are just getting started. And I think that the good news is it's never been easier to build with AI. The tools just keep getting better and better and better. We'll go into that a little bit. And obviously, like, agents are a big part of what's happening right now.
And what's interesting there is, in the conversations we've had in the past on AI and AI agents, I think it's actually a kind of a strength of yours that maybe you've come to it over the last 1.5, 2 years, rather than someone that's been steeped in it for 6, 7, 8 years. Because I've noticed, and this is probably partially also just because your DevRel experience, there's much less, or if there is terminology or jargon, it's very clearly identified of like what you mean by that. And maybe a good starting off point there is, even the term AI agent itself is a loaded term. There's lots of different interpretations. And, maybe not to say that there's only one that it can be defined as, but I'm curious, how would you define it for our audience, knowing that we're going to go into much more detail into how these things are built, how the systems work behind them?
Yeah, for sure. And I think your point is well taken, right? I think AI has historically been the domain of very smart people working in the machine learning space, right? And for sure, like, most people are not capable of building foundational models themselves. So most of what we're going to talk about is how do you build software that leverages the incredibly complex and hard to replicate things that these machine learning engineers have done. And agents is a great place to start. So what is an agent? I think that there's probably like a really, really fully loaded definition of what an agent is that would suit someone that has been in AI for the last 6 to 7 years. I myself have maybe a more humble definition of what an agent is. And it just kind of goes back to the roots of building software, right? Like, When you normally build traditional software, it's completely deterministic, right? You got like some for loops, some conditionals. For the most part, you understand how your program is going to operate. Agents are different. Agents take advantage of LLMs. So I think at this point, everyone is familiar with an LLM. If you're not, go check out chatgpt.com. You'll get a feel for it. So an agent consists of an LLM, but crucially, it consists of an LLM that has access to tools. And we can kind of get into what kind of tools or what are the tools good for and how do they use them. But because you've given the LLM access to tools, the LLM now has agency. It has agency in terms of how it can respond to the request that has been made by it, or has been made to it by the end user. It can see what tools it has at its disposal. It can choose to use none of the tools, several of the tools. It can combine the output from one tool and turn that into the input to a second tool. And to my thinking, this is what an agent is. And I think that you can layer more and more powerful capabilities on top of that concept to solve all kinds of use cases. But I think fundamentally, if you're dealing with an LLM that is non-deterministic in nature, that has access to tools that could live on your laptop or live in the cloud, and it has agency to execute those tools, recombine them in order to achieve a goal, you've got an agent.
That's a great definition. I think your point of starting kind of simply there, but also capturing like obviously a very large swath of the innovation that we're seeing right now in terms of when you try different AI agents out, I think virtually everyone I've used meets that definition. So it's good to kind of ground ourselves in that. And so, one of the things I'd like to maybe do now is dig a little bit more into what does this look like in terms of the development process, go into like the inner workings of how does an AI agent actually operate, and just make sure the developers understand that both for conceptually, but then how they'd actually start to think about building them.
Sure, sounds good. Should we pop into demo land?
Let's do it.
Okay, fantastic. So look, there are, I think quite at this point, quite literally dozens of tools developers can use to build agents. I work on the Langflow team. So what I'm showing you is Langflow. This is Langflow Desktop. It's a native Mac OS application that I'm running on a Mac laptop. It's completely free and open source. You can download it at langflow.org. When you install Langflow, we give you a bunch of templates that you can use to kind of kickstart your journey. One of those templates is called Simple Agent. So why don't we go ahead and see what Simple Agent looks like? So this is Langflow, a bunch of boxes and arrows. It's a visual experience for designing agents. This is a quick little README that helps get the developer oriented, but I'm going to go ahead and just dive into what we have here. So here, as I mentioned, the fundamental core of an agent is an LLM. So here we've got my agent. And in this case, I've wired it up to OpenAI, but you have access to all the major models and or major providers. And within the OpenAI family of models, I've chosen GPT 4.1. And in addition to wiring up the LLM, you want to give the agent a set of instructions. Now, in this case, this is just what comes as a default. You are a helpful assistant that can use tools to answer questions and perform tasks. It's important to understand that in the real world, you will provide probably significantly more complex instructions for your agent that help bound its behavior and certain outcomes. But in this case, we're going to start with this very simple idea. Now, I mentioned that what makes agents useful is that they can access tools. So you see right here, this is where we can wire up tools. And for demo purposes only, because this is not something that you would use in real software, I wired it up to both a calculator and a URL fetcher tool. So what does that buy you? Well, let's go to the built-in interactive playground. And let's go ahead and create a new session. And let's do some math, right? So let's say, what is 3.5678 to the 8th power? Now, what's important about this request that I'm making as an end user is that LLMs are natively very bad at math. So when I do this, the LLM is going to realize, oh no, I don't know how to do this. I'm going to have to use a tool. And you can see in the debugging experience that it used the evaluate expression tool. And then we go down here, and it shows you, boom, what the result is. And then you get the output from the agent that the answer is approximately 26,234.52. So great. Now let's ask our agent for something. Oh, did you have a question, Reed?
Yeah, this is will be a dumb question for some, but I'm here to ask the dumb questions as the MC on this
Oh,
video series. But
I'm here
but
for
what
it.
I'm curious about is I actually don't know the mechanic by how the LLM decides what it knows and what it doesn't know, like when to invoke tools. And I'm just curious if you
Oh
have
yeah,
any insight into like how that
I
how that.
I, I absolutely do. I'd love to share that. So all major foundational providers support tool calling. So you can imagine that, and I guess I can go ahead and share this. Everything that you're seeing visually here in Langflow, behind the scenes, it's all Python, right? So there's no magic happening. This is just a really accessible front end to fundamentally a Python application. And so what's happening? So in Python, we're calling OpenAI's API. They have a RESTful API that you can use called chat completion, right? That's what we're doing. This is a chat completion API. Because we've wired a calculator tool and a URL tool to this agent. When we make the RESTful API call to OpenAI, we tell it that it has access to a calculator tool and a URL tool. And very crucially, we're very specific about it. Like we give the tools have names and they have descriptions, and they have actions. So this information is passed via the API call to OpenAI. So then it is OpenAI, the actual foundational model itself, that decides, oh no, I can't answer this question. Let me send a response back to the caller that effectively invokes one of these two tools. So that's what happens. So in this particular case, if I go back to the playground, OpenAI realized as soon as it received this query that it didn't know how to answer it. It then sent a response back to us telling us to use the evaluate expression function with the value being passed in right here. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's a great explanation. Thanks, Carter.
Yeah, and look, honestly, tool calling in some ways predates agents, or it was maybe perhaps just the precursor to what we now sort of are familiar with as agents. So just to sort of pay off the rest of the demo, let's ask something completely different, right? What kind of news? Let's see, what kind of news is there about Stitch, very famous startup? Uh, in the past month, right? So importantly, exactly like what we said before, Reed, this query is going to OpenAI. It's going specifically to their 4.1 model. And the model is realizing, oh, wow, like I simply am not trained on data from the internet that is as recent as the past month. So it has to now execute a different tool called fetch content. And you can, and this is actually quite magical. I as the programmer, right? I as the person who built this Langflow app, I actually did not provide it with any information about something called news.google.com. That kind of knowledge is simply baked into the foundational model itself. So it has knowledge of news.google.com. It then passes in a search query of Stitch, and it comes back with a bunch of information, right? And then that information gets packaged and returned to the user. And we can see that here are a couple news highlights about let's see, some Plaid alumni hiring from Coinbase, exploding topics. Yeah, so it kind of used Google News to find this information.
That's very helpful. And one thing I was curious about is because those articles were from about a year ago, because I remember them, they were about
Yeah.
your recruiting folks. I'm curious, like, obviously there's some tuning probably that happens. Like, how do you make sure it actually gets you like the last 30 days? But what is like, because I'm sure there's a lot of this in agent development where it's like,
For sure.
one thing and then you iterate it to that exact like meaning that you had.
Yeah, so I think this is where a bunch of different things come into play, right? So agent instructions can be helpful here. It's there are I'm using a built-in rather naive tool, which is a URL fetch tool. There are other tools that are specifically tailored for agentic crawling and search retrieval on the internet. So one of them that we're actually going to look at in a little bit is called Tavily. So Tavily another startup that has a search API that is integrated with Langflow. So I think we've kind of like stumbled into one of the downsides of non-deterministic applications, right? And in agent building. And ultimately from a technique perspective, there's just a lot of testing. And and you're going to hear we talked about jargon before. You're going to hear terms like evals. So developers that are building agents or working with LLMs are going to want to build evals. But and what is an eval? And that's just jargon for tests. I honestly I don't know why the AI industry insists on creating new terms for old ideas, but evals are just natural language tests. And we're actually gonna look at some tools that can help you do that in a little bit. I think we should. This is actually a great jumping off point to a more maybe realistic and interesting agentic example. You want to dive into deep research?
Let's do it.
Okay, awesome. If you, yeah,
Oh, you might be teeing this up, but I was just going to say I'm very excited to understand this in more depth because I use a deep research agentic use case with ChatGPT all the time, and so maybe you're about to be off with that, but very
I
excited.
think so. Yeah, I mean, I think the reason I built this flow for us today was that people use deep research. People, ChatGPT users that have access to it use deep research all the time. And it's interesting to think about as a developer, how could you build your own deep research? So first, before I really dive into this, let's just go ahead and use it, right? So let's come up with a topic that we want to sort of do some deep research on. So I'm going to go ahead and delete my session and create a new session. And here we go. So we have a sort of a built-in query for us, right? I'm researching the effects of screen use on children. I'm a father. I've got two teenagers. This is very relevant to me. Help me build a report covering the last 7 years. So I'm going to go ahead and kick off this query. And I'm going to close the interactive playground. One thing that's kind of fun about Langflow is that you can see what components are running at a given time, and you can follow the flow of execution as it goes down the flow. But I'm going to go back to the beginning because I want to sort of show off what we've done. So we've decomposed this particular research problem into one, two, three, I think almost five agents. Let's dig into the first one. So this agent is wired up to. So every agent in your application, in theory, could be wired up to a different provider and a different model. This is really interesting for multi-agent use cases because you do not need to use powerful or expensive models for every step in your process. Now, so in this case, I'm actually using GPT 4.1 Nano. Instead of some downstream, I'll be using things like GPT 4.1 Mini. But you could imagine for certain portions of your workflow, you could use completely free, off-the-shelf, open source models, so long as it suits your needs. So in this case, let's look at the agent instructions, right? So this is a little bit more robust, right? You're a research planner. You're going to break down the user's question into 2 to 4 sub questions. And then you're going to return these sub questions in a markdown format, right? So I probably could have used a relatively free or cheap off open source model to do this. And then once you've done that, these sub questions are then going to get passed to a model or to an agent that I'm kind of calling my research agent. And we can take a quick look at some of its instructions, right? So it's a research agent. It has access to search tools. For each of the sub questions, I want it to get a bunch of sources of information, which includes the title, the URL, a short summary, so on and so forth. And I want it to return that data in markdown format. So Reed, very quickly, I mentioned Tavily search. So Tavily Search is a really great professional grade, enterprise grade search product. So I've created a Tavily account. I've wired up my API key and I've connected it to my research agent as a tool. Um, Another thing that I want to go ahead and show off because it's pretty fun. I want to talk a little bit about this question of observability and evals. And feel free to dive in anytime. But this is a tool called Arise. So you might notice in my Langflow or in my flow, I'm not using any kind of Arise component. That's because Arise and several other observability tools in the AI space, they're bootstrapped off of setting API keys in your AI applications. So because I created an Arise account and created an API key, is able to set an environment variable with the API key, and then after I do that, I get all of this observability for free. So you'll notice, let's see, what is it? It's when we're recording this, it's on August 1st. We're doing this at 12:29. So this is live output from the deep research flow that I've been executing. And I don't have time to go into it now, but check this out. Right here, Arise gives you the ability to create these things called evals. So in your production applications, where obviously the reliability of the response from your agents is really important, you can use tools like Arise and other similar tools to create these evals that run as your agents run and provide real-time telemetry on whether the responses from your agent are succeeding or failing. It's really really interesting.
That's very cool because both your point about evals, like the jargon that we use around them, but also I actually have not. I've heard of Arise. I've heard great things about it, but I've never actually seen it in action. And so, great context for folks that are building agents in terms of how they can plug this into their workflow.
Yeah, it's a really interesting tool, and as you can see here, you're just getting a ton of visibility into all of the things that are happening behind the scenes as your agent is running. And this is, Reed, we talked about it. Like people had been building software before AI, right? And software engineers have been developing best practices over time. And it started back when programs ran on a PC, and it evolved as our applications moved to the cloud. And it's evolving now as we're building with AI and building agentic applications. But fundamentally, this isn't significantly different than just the same than logging, right? The same kind of ideas that developers have been used to for a really long time. However, because the actual execution can be so non-deterministic, the need for logging and for observability is significantly higher than it used to be. Logs in the old days, logs were maybe only really useful when something went wrong, and you needed to understand what part of your system had failed. Now, like logs are necessary. And logs are necessary even when things go right, because it isn't binary. It isn't black and white. You can have a spectrum of outcomes that range from completely broken to working perfectly, and then all the gradations in between. So let's quickly go back to this question, right? And because I want to see what happened. Oh, fantastic, great. So at the end of this deep research execution, we now have a pretty thorough report on the effects of screen use on children. You can kind of read this all yourselves. And but I wanted to show off another fun thing, right? So here at the very end, I have a notifier tool or a notifier component, and let's just go ahead and open it up. So here, I tell the agent that it's a notifier, and I tell it that if the report contains the word Langflow, email a report in HTML format to carter.rabasa@ibm.com. And you can imagine, of course, I'm being a bit cheeky because this is a demo, but you can imagine in the real world, if you're building agents that are all about combing the internet for news. You can imagine that there might be certain things that you would want to use to trigger a more urgent response to an end user. So this definitely works. So if we wanted to, in fact, I'm going to go ahead and kick this off. Let's go ahead and create a new session, and let's say, please provide an overview of the most popular AI and agentic tools for developers over the past 2 years. And we won't sit here and wait for this to finish running, right? Another thing that I thought was really interesting for us to kind of talk about with all the folks that are watching, you might notice that the execution time that it takes for these agents to run, it's measured in double or triple digit seconds, right? And that's very different than the experiences that people or the end users are typically accustomed to when they use applications on the web or on their mobile device. So one of the things that's really interesting about agents is thinking about the different channels and the different asynchronous channels that users can use to engage with agents. So if it's cool with you, like we could quickly switch over to a fun sort of travel planning demo and just sort of show off how that works from an email perspective.
I love that. Yeah, and I think to your point, very interested to hear how you think about those async channels and how to kind of think about the user experience on the other side of the agents that you're building given this latency.
Yeah, for sure. So like I'll go ahead and pop open Outlook, and I've got a couple emails flagged. So here's an email that I sent to an agent that me and my team built. And by the way, this is available for everybody. So you can go ahead and send an email to travel@email-agent.ai. And this is a real trip read. So me and my family, we're going on vacation next week. So I asked the agent to create a travel itinerary for a trip from Seattle, Washington to Tofino, BC, on August 3rd. I provide some context. I describe that this is a family of four, a couple parents, couple kids, and clear guidance on how to get there and things to do in Tofino. So I provide all this context. And what's nice about email as an interface for agents is that it's simply by nature and definition asynchronous. I'm not sitting in my inbox waiting for the agent to get back to me. And I think for developers that are thinking about how they want to leverage agents and like what kind of use cases like fit into agentic technologies and techniques, like these are fantastic, right? Like any ultimately, like you can really think of an agent as a member of your team, right? Just like it's another person that has access to tools and can do things for you. So in the same way that you would ask a colleague or someone that you work with to perform a task, you wouldn't expect that task to be completed in like 30 seconds or 1 minute, right? So email is a fantastic channel. Things like SMS are fantastic channels for doing this. But in any case, so I sent off this email, and here's the response, right? And it gives me a very, very detailed itinerary, things I didn't even ask for, right? It gives me a forecast, packing suggestions, right? Like a really thoughtful travel itinerary. And once again, if we dug into the code behind this, I think you'd see some pretty thoughtful agent instructions that provide some guidelines and some guardrails for what the agent should do. But what's really great here is that you don't have to stop, right? Like email is not just asynchronous; it's also alive. So here, the agent prompts me to say, "Hey, like let me know if you need anything else," and I reply on my own time frame. By the way, I say, "Yeah. Can you recommend some family-friendly hotels that we can stay in?" And once again, at a reasonable sort of time frame later, I get a response with top family-friendly hotels in Tofino, with names, highlights, and websites for me to book with. So yeah, this is just sort of it's just a little example of how you can leverage email, SMS, and other asynchronous channels to deliver experiences that end users are perfectly happy with because they're not sort of sitting in front of a web page twiddling their thumbs. So it's just a really interesting technique for developers to keep in mind.
And maybe an interesting question I was going to ask there, because I do think the technology is so far along that it really feels like, obviously there's a lot of use cases people are already, embracing as consumers, but it feels like the technology is there for just like a few tweaks on UX to take it even to another level of adoption. I'm thinking about that experience you just walked through where you were planning a trip to Torofino. And I'm just curious, just like personally, outside of that kind of like using an agent to research parts of the itinerary, get ideas, what else did you go and do without agents or without AI? Like I know what I would do probably. I would go look at those restaurants up on Yelp or on Google reviews and decide where I wanted to go. And I'm just curious what else you looked at outside of that. And the main reason being hoping to provoke a little bit of inspiration for folks when they are building agents to think through, not only is this a really valuable leap to go to like, synchronous to async, but also what are the things that when I get that async information, I may be going to other, data avenues or data sources in order to kind of fill out that answer that the agent might not have given me on the first pass.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's a great question. So this is what the travel agent looks like itself. And you can see that we've broken down the experience into a bunch of sub agents. So we have a city selection agent, a local expert agent, a travel concierge agent, right? So I think if you're the developer, ultimately, like you do need to figure out what you think the boundaries are of what your agent can and cannot do, right? And look, the what is both scary but also exciting about working in this space as a developer is that the capabilities of agents and things like MCP, they're growing and changing and advancing like on a daily basis, right? So I think like one thing that you're a thought that you're provoking is like, sure, like I want to figure out like where we would want to eat. Perhaps I would want to ask the end user what I don't know, like what sort of ratings or reviews services do they trust, right? I know that I'm kind of a Yelp person, right? But I know other people are sort of more like Google reviews people.
Mhm.
So there's definitely situations where the agent needs to get clarification, right? And it would want to ask the user for some guidance. And then based on the user's response, if I say I'm a Yelp person, then it would look up Yelp reviews and it would give me a sense of like where I should be eating in Tofino based on Yelp, right? And then take it a step further. I mean, I think this is what people do in real life, and it's what they want agents to do. Then I get to the point where it's like I would want it to book a reservation, right? For our final night in Tofino, for the four of us. And I'd want it to take care of it, like completely for me, right? And what would that require? It would require the agent to be able to kind of act on my behalf and potentially call the restaurant, make the reservation, or interact with the restaurant's sort of reservation systems. And remarkably, like all of these things are actually possible. But Reed, like these things are real. Like I've seen Twilio, a company I used to work at. I think I mentioned that. They recently launched a really powerful API called Conversational Relay, which effectively enables developers to build real-time voice-powered experiences with AI. And then, of course, like they can plug that into Twilio's ability to actually make real phone calls, right? So this can create some discomfort with people. The idea of an AI powered virtual person calling a restaurant and engaging in a conversation, but I think ultimately we're just going to become more and more comfortable with these things because the outcomes are really positive for everybody, right? If you think about the restaurant in Tofino, they want me to be able to book a reservation with them, right? I mean, there's an economic incentive for them to do this. And there's a desire for me as an end user, not to, I don't know, spend 30 to 45 minutes on hold or on the phone, right? So I think, I think people's comfort levels are gonna kind of increase over time. Same with the financial aspect. I mean, like I think people are going to want agents to be able to pay for things and buy things on their behalf, right? And I'm sure you know this better than I do. But in both the agent space and the MCP space, there's just a really robust conversation happening right now around authentication, authorization. How's this going to work? And I'm sure Stitch and other companies that build in this space are figuring out exactly, like, technically, like how will this work? What do developers need to do to enable these experiences? Because once again, like from the end user perspective, once I have established a degree of trust with an agent, sure, yeah, like I'll give you access to my credit card, or who knows, like I'll give you access to a virtual credit card that has like some hard limits on it that some new credit card provider creates specifically for consumers, that are in this AI friendly space. So yeah, I think we'll probably talk about it like as we wrap, right? But like things are changing all the time. I think developers are constantly pushing the limits of the art of the possible, and I think that like tool builders and service providers are responding to this. So we can have this conversation in a month, and there will probably be like a step function of difference in terms of what agents are capable of.
We're gonna have to bring you back when GPT-5 releases in the next week or so, because we're sitting here on August 1st recording this, and I think all of these primitives will still be extremely valuable and valid, but it will be interesting, to your point, of seeing kind of the Cambrian explosion that comes from that in itself. And so with that, I kind of wanted to just wrap with kind of a overall question around how you think about building AI agents, agentic experiences for
Yeah.
consumers. Any last kind of takeaways that you'd share with the audience and with developers that are looking to either learn more or figure out how they want to navigate this new world?
Yeah, sure. Well, just like listen to my T-shirt, just run NCP. No, that's a joke. But I mean, I think honestly, like I beware of people who act like everything is fully baked, and if you just learn this, you'll be fine, right? I think things are changing super fast. It's a good news, bad news thing. I think there's never been more pressure for developers to understand how these technologies work, how to build these things. But look, there's also just never been more opportunity. Developers can completely reinvent themselves by sort of like by learning how these tools work. Now, because we're so early, yeah, like nothing's fully baked yet. Like I think Langflow is a lovely tool, but it is like it is insanely actively under development, and so are all similar tools, right? Like all of the dozens of frameworks and tools that are operating in this agentic space, they're iterating super fast. I mean, there's constantly breaking changes. So there's a level of tolerance I think that developers have to have, because your point about the Cambrian explosion, right? It's like these things, like I'm they're not baked. If we just rewound 3 years ago, and you told me as an engineer, Carter, I need you to stand up some SaaS application that does X, Y, and Z, I would have a lot of clarity on like what I need to do. Like, and there wouldn't be a lot of like confusion in my mind about like how to stand that up. That just doesn't exist today. So I think, and ultimately, I think also because the scope of use cases for AI is exploding, right, and constantly changing. Going back to the SaaS example, like if you told me to build something, I could almost instantly tell you like if it was feasible or not feasible, right? Like there was just, we all had heuristics in our head of like what can you do in a web app versus what can't you do in a web app, right? I don't think those heuristics like exist in a really fine-tuned way. So I think so not only do developers need to sort of learn how to build, they need to even learn what's possible. And increasingly the answer is like it is possible, right? Like you can throw a crazy request at me that I would have laughed at a few years ago, and I can probably tell you, like, you know what? I think we can do that, Reed. So yeah, I think my advice, my super pragmatic advice to devs is that you just have to play with these tools.
Mm-hmm.
You have to really start to you have to play with them because you need to understand the scope and the art of the possible. You also need to play with them because not every tool is for every person, company, or use case.
Mm-hmm.
People who build products, you build products at Stitch, we build products on the Langflow team. We just understand that, there's sort of our product is tailored to a particular kind of user, and it really excels at certain use cases. And that's just how products differentiate themselves from each other, right? There will not be like a single thing that all developers use to build agents. Like that's
Mhm.
not going to happen because the diversity of use cases is way too broad, right? So you need to figure out what is your style of AI programming? What are you trying to do? What are you trying to build at your company? Like, what are your use cases? And then just go try the tools out. And unfortunately, there's a lot to try, right? Like right now, we're just talking maybe narrowly about agentic tools, right? But there's a similar diversity of observability tools. There's a similar diversity of tool vendors. There are. I showed off that you can wire up these agents to tools, and in Langflow, like we have a built-in palette of tools that are available to developers, but that palette is a small subset of all the tools that exist in the world. And there are entire companies that are that are basically trying to build tool gateways for agents. So in Langflow, instead of worrying about like, does Langflow have a Twilio tool or not?
Yep.
You use a tool, like arcade.dev, where you sort of pull over the arcade.dev component, you wire that up to your agent, and then through that gateway, you have access to however many hundreds or thousands of tools that they have. So yeah, and there are a lot of vendors building across all of these different dimensions, but ultimately, like I think it's great, right? Like I think choice is good for developers. I remember before, there were like really reasonable competitors to OpenAI. Like what you could do with AI was kind of dependent on like what could OpenAI do, right?
Mhm.
And now you have Anthropic, and you have a really rich set of competitors in that space. And ultimately, as a developer and as an engineer, you benefit when you have companies competing to serve you,
Yep.
right? So I think that's the good news. It's like, yeah, bad news, you got a lot to learn. Good news, these companies are working super hard to like make your life easier, to make you productive, and to like help you build the things that you want to build.
I think that's a wonderful note to end on because you did a fair amount of foreshadowing of what we'll be chatting about in future conversation here, which I think is great in terms of what else is there to learn, what other tools are there to use as you start thinking about not just building an AI agent, which you might use Langflow for. What if you want a tool gateway like arcade.dev will be one of the participants in the series as well.
Mm.
How do you think about observability? We'll be talking with Honeycomb. Thinking about authenticating and building MCP servers, we'll talk with Stainless and then Stitch as well, someone internally here. And so, I mean, overall, I don't think I could have foreshadowed the rest of the series better. And so, kind of finally, I just want to say thank you, Carter, for joining us. I hope folks will either reach out to you or go to Langflow in order to check out the products, and just play around with what's possible. But really want to emphasize that kind of like concluding note you had, where really a lot of the learning comes from playing with things and continuing to do so, because you find even as the models progress, something you didn't think was possible 6 months ago might now be possible. And that's something that we found internally in our own agent and AI development. And so I would just kind of plus one that final note that you had.
Yeah, for sure. And just one final sort of comment. It is I want people to understand that some people think that it's too late. Some people think like, oh shucks, like I'm too late to AI development. I kind of that couldn't be more untrue, right?
Mhm.
Like now, like there's never been a better time to learn how to build with AI.
Yep.
And frankly, like through my observation and experience, like the people that are like really putting in the time and really like figuring out how to bake this stuff, like not just into the stuff they do at work, right? But like, their own projects. Like right now, the entire sort of engineering industry is going through a moment where like you're going to have people that are really like learning how these tools work and sort
Mhm.
of branding themselves as people that are building the next generation of software. So there's just never been a better opportunity if you're an engineer to sort of figure out like what your future is going to be in this industry. And like I am not a negative person about the prospects of engineers in the world of AI. Like I sort of really disavow that fear, right? I think agents are your friends. They're going to help you write code. They're going to help you test code. Like they're going to make you more productive, but only when you learn how to use them, right? So I just think there's a ton of opportunity for engineers. I think it's super exciting, and thank you so much for having me. I think this is like a good positive conversation to have. And just yeah, thanks for letting me have it with you.
No, thank you, Cutter. And I hope everyone joins us for the next sessions as well. There'll be a lot more detail, just like we got from Carter, as well as demos. And so thank you again to Carter and for the audience for listening along.